On an ordinary day in American politics, except it wasn't ordinary at all, a press conference unfolded that would send shockwaves through the corridors of global power. The statement, total capitulation to Vladimir Putin, isn't hyperbole when we examine the language, the threats, and the casual dismissal of our long-standing alliances that echoed throughout the Oval Office. Why did this happen? What forces led to a moment that many critics now label as the ultimate betrayal of Ukraine and, by extension, a catastrophic misstep in global security? Imagine watching as a once formidable voice in American politics steps away from the mantle of defending democratic values and instead seems to embrace a narrative of appeasement. Donald Trump's latest press appearance, replete with bombastic assertions, calculated omissions, and controversial solutions to a conflict that has pained countless lives, raises urgent questions. Is the United States willingly sacrificing its allies for what some see as a misguided notion of peace? How does this pivot toward deference to Russian interests reshape our foreign policy, and what does it mean for global stability? In this video, we unpack every element of Trump's remarks, from his seemingly offhand suggestion that Ukraine must make peace, despite being the aggressed nation in Russia's unlawful invasion, to his boasts about his phone call with Vladimir Putin. We'll explore the historical context that set the stage for this exchange, analyze the implications of dismissing NATO's role in defending Ukraine, and weigh the domestic and international backlash that has already begun to coalesce. This isn't just a commentary on one man's words. It is an investigation into how a single press conference might signal the beginning of a broader shift in U.S. foreign policy, one that undermines decades of effort to maintain a rules-based international order. If you're asking yourself, what happened and why did they do that, then read on. The stakes are astronomical, from the integrity of our alliances to the very security of democratic nations around the globe. Nothing is left untouched. Ukraine's fight for sovereignty is not a recent development. Since the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Ukraine has oscillated between aspirations for European integration and the heavy shadow of Russian influence. The annexation of Crimea in 2014 and the subsequent conflict in eastern Ukraine underscored a fundamental truth: Russia's ambitions do not end at its borders. For decades, Ukraine has stood as a frontline state, a symbol of democratic resistance against authoritarian encroachment. Yet, this struggle has been a double-edged sword. On one side, Ukraine's defiant stand has galvanized Western support, particularly from NATO and the European Union. On the other, it has also become a pawn in a larger geopolitical chess game where any perceived misstep could tip the scales in favor of Russian expansionism. This precarious balance is exactly why Trump's dismissive tone regarding Ukraine's territorial integrity and its right to determine its own future shocks not only his political opponents, but also many Americans who cherish the nation's hard-fought democratic ideals. Historically, American foreign policy has straddled the line between promoting democratic ideals and engaging in realpolitik, a pragmatic, sometimes ruthless pursuit of national interest. From the Cold War to today, U.S. administrations have repeatedly wrestled with how best to support allies while avoiding direct conflict with global powers like Russia and China. In recent years, however, the U.S. has leaned heavily on multilateral alliances, most notably NATO, to secure not only its interests, but also the stability of the global order. This network of commitments, once seen as an impenetrable bulwark against external threats, now appears to be under severe strain. When Trump dismisses the idea that Ukraine could or should ever rejoin NATO or revert to pre-2024 borders, he is not just offering an opinion, he is effectively advocating for a dismantling of a decades-long strategic framework that has ensured peace and stability in Europe. During the press conference, Trump repeatedly asserted that the war is ridiculous and that Ukraine's primary objective should be to make peace. This position, coming from someone who once championed a tough foreign policy stance, seems to sidestep a crucial point. Ukraine is not the aggressor. Rather, Ukraine has been forced into conflict by an unlawful Russian invasion. By suggesting that the only solution is for Ukraine to capitulate or negotiate on equal footing with Russia, Trump effectively reframes the narrative. Is it really a quest for peace when it seems to involve sacrificing the very principles of national sovereignty and democratic self-determination? In his rhetoric, Trump even dares to imply that Ukrainian leadership, citing poll numbers and other metrics, is somehow inadequate, thereby justifying a realignment of power in the region. This argument, thinly veiled as common sense, glosses over the immense sacrifices made by the Ukrainian people and the brutal realities of living under occupation. One of the most explosive segments of the conference centered around the idea that Ukraine should not be expected to revert to its pre-24 borders. For context, these borders represent not only geographical delineations, but also the hopes and dreams of millions who have fought to protect their homeland. To dismiss these borders as unrealistic is to write off the sacrifices of an entire nation. Furthermore, Trump's dismissal of the idea that Ukraine could one day join NATO is deeply troubling. NATO, for many, is more than just a military alliance. It is a promise of collective security, a commitment that if one nation is attacked, all will come to its aid. By suggesting that Ukrainian NATO membership is impractical, Trump is undermining a pillar of Western security architecture. His comments echo earlier remarks by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, correctly identified in some circles as Pete Hegseth and others, hinting at a broader consensus, or perhaps a coordinated retreat, from defending Ukraine's territorial integrity. Perhaps the most incendiary part of the press conference was Trump's enthusiastic recounting of his phone call with Vladimir Putin. Trump boasted that Putin wants peace, implying that his approach is precisely what Moscow has been waiting for. This assertion not only fuels the narrative that Trump is in bed with Putin, but also opens the door to further speculation. Is he willingly playing into the Kremlin's hands? Critics argue that by positioning himself as the peacemaker who can finally broker an end to the conflict, Trump is abdicating his responsibility to stand with Ukraine. The imagery is powerful. A president so enamored with the idea of personal diplomacy that he is willing to sacrifice the sovereignty of an allied nation for a quick, if dubious, resolution. Moreover, the notion that Putin's overtures for peace are genuine is, at best, naive and, at worst, a calculated lie meant to obscure the reality of Russian aggression. In a series of bewildering statements, Trump even went so far as to talk about the possibility of annexing Canada, invading Greenland, and taking over Panama. These aren't mere rhetorical flourishes. They are indicative of a broader worldview in which American territory and influence are negotiable commodities. For many critics, such remarks are symptomatic of a leadership style that prioritizes ego and self-aggrandizement over coherent strategy and moral responsibility. When the president uses the language of conquest and territorial ambition to describe what should be a solemn commitment to democratic allies, it becomes clear that his priorities have shifted. Rather than defending the values that have long defined U.S. foreign policy, he appears content to barter national security for personal and political gain, adding insult to injury. During the same press cycle, spineless Republicans confirmed Tulsi Gabbard as the Director of National Intelligence, a move that many see as further evidence of an administration that is more interested in appeasing Russia than safeguarding America's interests. Gabbard, whose past positions have often aligned uncomfortably with pro-Russian narratives, now sits at the helm of U.S. intelligence. This appointment sends a clear message. When even the corridors of American intelligence are infiltrated by figures seen as Putin puppets, the entire security apparatus is compromised. For viewers who value accountability and the integrity of national institutions, this is a betrayal of epic proportions. For decades, the United States has projected an image of unwavering commitment to its allies and to the cause of global democracy. Trump's remarks, however, cast a long shadow over this legacy. As news of his capitulation spreads, questions arise not just about what this means for Ukraine, but for every nation that has relied on American leadership in times of crisis. Across Europe and beyond, leaders are left to wonder if the United States is willing to sacrifice Ukraine's sovereignty on the altar of a so-called peace. What does that say about our collective commitment to international norms? Already, European markets are jittery, and security experts are warning that any sign of American weakness could embolden not only Russia, but also other revisionist powers. Within the United States, the political fallout has been equally dramatic. Many Democrats have decried Trump's comments as nothing short of treasonous, accusing him of selling out American values for personal gain. Progressive voices, in particular, have rallied around the idea that this press conference symbolizes a broader departure from the principles of democracy and accountability. Even within some factions of the Republican Party, there is discomfort. While some Republicans see Trump's actions as a necessary recalibration of U.S. foreign policy, a return to realpolitik, others worry that aligning too closely with Russian interests will irreparably damage America's reputation on the world stage. The partisan divide over this issue is stark, and it underscores a deeper schism in how the nation perceives its role in a rapidly changing global order internationally. The response has been one of alarm. Leaders in NATO, the European Union, and beyond have expressed grave concerns about any indication that the United States is willing to compromise on security guarantees. In many ways, Trump's press conference is seen as a rallying cry for those who believe that the West must double down on its commitments to allies like Ukraine and reject any notion that appeasement is a viable strategy. In Moscow, meanwhile, the reaction has been predictably self-congratulatory. State media have hailed Trump's apparent willingness to engage directly with Putin as a sign that the U.S. is finally ready to make peace on Russia's terms. Such narratives are not only dangerous, they undermine the very foundations of international law and the global order that has, for decades, kept unchecked ambitions at bay. Beyond the realm of geopolitics, there are tangible economic consequences to consider. As Trump touted his brilliant ideas for securing America's financial interests, boasting about loans, security on money, and even a reassessment of how much Europe has contributed, the underlying message was clear. This is not about the lives lost in Ukraine or the principles at stake. It's about dollars and cents. Economic analysts warn that any attempt to placate a power like Putin through such piecemeal deals could have disastrous consequences for global markets. The U.S. dollar, long a symbol of stability, might soon find itself challenged by a multipolar financial order, one in which American influence is no longer taken for granted. Inflation, rising prices, and the specter of economic instability are all part of the fallout when a nation of America's stature appears willing to negotiate away its long-held advantages. At its core, Trump's press conference represents more than just a policy misstep. It is, for many, a fundamental betrayal of American values. The United States has long prided itself on being a beacon of freedom, a champion of democratic ideals, and a protector of those who dare to stand up to tyranny. By suggesting that Ukraine must make peace, regardless of the cost to its sovereignty, Trump is effectively telling the world that American principles are negotiable. For those who have long viewed the U.S. as a force for good, this is a crushing blow. It is a moment that forces us to ask, have we sacrificed our ideals on the altar of expediency? When security guarantees are traded for quick deals, and when the lives of millions are reduced to bargaining chips in a geopolitical power play, the very soul of our nation is at risk. History is replete with examples of the perils of appeasement, from Chamberlain's ill-fated policies before World War II to more recent episodes where short-term gains led to long-term instability. Trump's approach, with its cavalier dismissal of the sanctity of international borders and alliances, fits squarely into this dangerous tradition. By seemingly capitulating to Putin's demands, even if only rhetorically, Trump is setting a precedent that may encourage other authoritarian regimes to push their agendas. The cost of such a shift is not measured in dollars alone, but in the erosion of trust between nations, the destabilization of regions, and the gradual unraveling of the international order that has kept peace for generations. In today's hyper-connected world, every word spoken from the Oval Office is dissected, debated, and disseminated at lightning speed. Trump's press conference was no exception. Social media platforms, cable news, and independent commentators have all seized upon his statements, each framing them through their own ideological lens. For critics, Trump's words are an admission of guilt, a surrender not just of American ideals, but of the very responsibility that comes with leadership. For his supporters, however, these same words are interpreted as bold, unapologetic realism, a necessary break from a foreign policy that they see as overly idealistic and dangerously naive. This dichotomy in public perception underscores a fundamental truth. In the battle for the narrative, facts and rhetoric are in constant conflict. It is instructive to compare the current approach with that of previous administrations. Where past presidents have often stressed the importance of collective security and multilateral engagement, even when it meant taking unpopular stances, Trump's rhetoric is markedly unilateral. His emphasis on making peace by any means necessary, even if it means compromising the rights of our allies, is a stark departure from a tradition that has long defined U.S. diplomacy. The legacy of American leadership in the post-World War II era is built on the notion that freedom is worth defending, that alliances are not mere conveniences, but essential pillars of global stability, and that no nation, no matter how powerful, has the right to rewrite the rules by force. Trump's apparent willingness to let go of these principles is not only jarring, it is historically unprecedented for Ukraine. The ramifications of this press conference are immediate and profound. If the United States, once the stalwart defender of Ukrainian sovereignty, begins to signal that its support is conditional or negotiable, the entire region could be plunged into uncertainty. Eastern European nations that have relied on American security guarantees might now be forced to reconsider their alliances and defenses. The prospect of Ukrainian borders being redrawn, or worse, its democratic institutions undermined, could embolden Russia to press further. Already, military experts warn that any retreat from long-standing commitments could lead to a domino effect, destabilizing not just Ukraine, but the entire region. The brave soldiers and civilians who have sacrificed so much may soon find themselves abandoned by the very nation that once vowed to stand by them. Beyond Ukraine, the crisis poses a fundamental challenge to NATO and the broader concept of collective security. Trump's remarks have already sparked debate among European leaders about the viability of the alliance in an era of shifting power dynamics. Can NATO continue to function as the bulwark against Russian aggression if one of its most influential partners signals a willingness to compromise on the principles that underpin it? Moreover, the credibility of U.S. leadership on the world stage is at stake. When the nation known for its steadfast commitment to democratic values appears to capitulate to authoritarian demands, the message is clear. American resolve is waning. This perception, whether accurate or not, could have a corrosive effect on international institutions, emboldening adversaries and leaving allies questioning where their true security lies. The potential economic fallout from this shift in policy cannot be underestimated. Markets thrive on stability and predictability, and any hint that the U.S. is ready to renegotiate or abandon its long-standing commitments sends ripples through global finance. Investors, already jittery from rising inflation and geopolitical uncertainty, may begin to pull back from what was once seen as the safest of harbors. Politically, the divide within the United States will only deepen. For those who view Trump's approach as a necessary corrective to an overextended foreign policy, the appeal is clear. But for the vast majority who see this as a dangerous retreat from democratic values, the reaction will be one of outrage and mobilization. Already, protests and heated debates on both sides of the aisle have begun to shape the political narrative, setting the stage for a turbulent election cycle and potentially a realignment of American political priorities. In the wake of such dramatic developments, one thing is undeniable: accountability is essential. The American public, and indeed the international community, must demand answers. How did we get to a point where our national security is being bartered away in favor of expediency? Who is responsible for allowing this shift in policy? And what steps can be taken to restore not only our alliances, but the very principles that have long defined us as a nation? This is not a call for immediate retribution, but rather a demand for clarity and a recommitment to the values that have long underpinned our global leadership. The United States must reaffirm its dedication to defending democracy, both at home and abroad, and ensure that any future negotiations are conducted with an unwavering commitment to justice, freedom, and the rule of law. In light of these revelations, it is imperative that American policymakers embark on a thorough reassessment of current foreign policy priorities. The rhetoric of making peace must be replaced with a genuine, robust strategy that prioritizes the security of our allies and the integrity of our international commitments. For Ukraine, this means reaffirming support for its sovereignty, whether through increased military aid, economic sanctions on aggressors, or renewed diplomatic engagement that leaves no room for ambiguity. A clear, unambiguous statement of support from Washington could reverse the dangerous narrative that our leadership is willing to negotiate away hard-earned freedoms and borders. Such a recalibration would not only reassure Eastern European allies, but also restore confidence in America's role as the world's defender of democratic values. A key part of this strategic shift must involve reinforcing NATO and other multilateral alliances. Rather than questioning the feasibility of Ukrainian membership or accepting a diluted version of security guarantees, U.S. policymakers should work hand-in-hand with European leaders to create a more resilient, future-proof alliance. This might involve revisiting and updating the alliance's strategic objectives, investing in modern military capabilities, and establishing clear lines of communication and accountability between member nations. By reaffirming its commitment to collective defense, the United States can help create a deterrent not only against Russian aggression but also against any future challenges to the international order. In doing so, we not only protect our allies but also preserve the values that have long defined our approach to global leadership. Beyond traditional military and diplomatic measures, the coming years will require innovative policy approaches that address the complex challenges of the modern world. From cybersecurity to energy independence, the United States must be prepared to confront a range of non-traditional threats that are just as capable of undermining global stability as conventional military power. Investments in technology, infrastructure, and education will be critical for maintaining a competitive edge. Simultaneously, reforming intelligence agencies and ensuring that figures placed in positions of power, such as the recent controversial appointment in our intelligence community, are held to the highest standards of accountability and expertise will be essential. Only by marrying old-fashioned realism with forward-looking innovation can America hope to navigate the turbulent waters of the 21st century. Finally, any discussion about the future of American foreign policy must acknowledge the role of the citizenry. In an era when misinformation can spread as rapidly as truth, an informed and engaged public is the best defense against authoritarian impulses and foreign manipulation. Civic education, robust public debate, and a free press are not mere luxuries. They are the bedrock upon which any enduring democracy is built. For the millions who have witnessed the erosion of trust in government institutions, this is a call to action. It is a reminder that the future of global security depends not only on high-level negotiations and policy decisions, but also on the everyday vigilance of citizens who refuse to accept the betrayal of core American values. As we stand at the crossroads of history, the events of Trump's recent press conference demand more than a passing comment or a viral meme. They compel us to ask hard questions about the nature of American leadership, the integrity of our alliances, and the enduring commitment to democratic values. Donald Trump's remarks, a cavalier dismissal of Ukraine's right to self-determination, a brazen flirtation with authoritarian models of governance, and a proposal to rethink borders and alliances that have long protected global peace, are not isolated missteps. They are symptomatic of a deeper malaise, a willingness to prioritize expediency and personal ambition over the enduring principles that have long defined American foreign policy. For Ukraine, this moment is a painful reminder of the cost of betrayal. For NATO and the international community, it is a stark warning that the time for complacency is over. And for every American who believes in the promise of freedom and justice, it is a call to reassert our nation's values, not through empty rhetoric or ill-conceived shortcuts, but through a renewed commitment to the alliances, principles, and strategies that have sustained us through our darkest hours. Looking forward, the path is clear. We must rebuild a policy framework that leaves no room for ambiguity, that staunchly defends the sovereignty of every nation, and that reaffirms our role as the global guardian of democratic ideals. We must demand accountability from those who would trade our security for political expediency. And we must, above all, remember that the true measure of leadership lies not in fleeting declarations of peace, but in the steadfast defense of freedom, even when it is difficult, even when it is unpopular, and even when it means standing alone. The stakes are nothing less than the future of global security and the very soul of American democracy. As citizens, as allies, and as members of the international community, we must reject any notion that a shortcut to peace can come at the cost of justice. In the face of overwhelming challenges, our commitment to democratic values must remain unyielding, because when those values are compromised, it is not just one nation that suffers, but the entire world.